What meets the eye is a very vital part of marketing, especially where consumer choices are concerned. And here to tell us a little bit more about this kind of positioning is INSEAD Associate Professor of Marketing, Pierre Chandon. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Your research would indicate that placement on supermarket shelves is even more important than brands when it comes to what consumers actually buy. How does that work out?
That's right. Unless you're Coca-Cola or the latest new product that everybody will find and buy no matter what, it's very important to be visible on the shelves. And what we call visual equity, which is the incremental impact you get from being visible, is more important than brand equity for really two reasons. Number one, it's a precursor of choice. Unseen is unsold. If people don't see you, then there's no way that their brand preferences can have any impact. Number two, consider today the typical hypermarket has up to 100,000 items for sale. And if you go online, it's even more. There's a long tail of millions of products available. Well, in both cases, it's a question of money, but it's also a question of smart placement. What my research shows, for example, is that if you're located on the top of the shelf, for example, it increases the percentage of people who see you by about 20%, but it also increases your choice by about 20%. And we also find that if you're in the middle of a placement, it also increases the chance that you'll be seen and bought.
So who actually, do companies have people who go around to the supermarkets and make sure that that's what's happening when they've agreed to that with a supermarket chain?
Yeah, well, now the supermarkets and retailers are very sophisticated, so they have all sorts of programs in place to make sure what we call the planogram, which is this a map of the shelf is in place and followed. And yes, today companies are trying really hard to make sure they're in the right position and spending a lot of money to make sure it happens. And this is partly because we have now these great tools such as eye tracking data, which allow us to look at how people actually shop. How do people actually look at supermarket shelves?
How did you measure? How does eye tracking data work? How did you actually measure kind of consumer responses to location?
So there are a number of ways, but basically you give special goggles to consumers and you ask them to shop the way they normally shop. And these devices look at the location of the eye, and they're able to map the location of the eye with the location of the products to be able to tell you exactly what you're looking at, when, and for how long.
Do you have any concrete examples of how placement influenced purchase?
Yeah, so we know that the big placements like buying an end-of-aisle display have huge effects on sales. But what we found in our study is that actually just the location on the shelf and just increasing the number of facing can also have an impact. If you double the number of facing on average for a brand, you increase the noting, which is whether people see you or not, by about 26%. You increase consideration and choice by 10% on average. But if we're talking about specific low market share brands, and regular buyers, then the effect is even stronger. We find that you can increase the choice by up to 67%, which is a huge deal for a low market share brand.
So, but that's also sounds as though it could be more influential than people looking for a brand. If you're faced with a wall of one product, will you stop looking for the brand you want?
If you're again Coca-Cola, people will probably find you no matter where you are. But if you're a low market share brand, and also we find that if you're targeting younger people or educated people or people with an open mind who don't buy just based on brand or based on price, well, you will increase the effect of what we call this visual equity, the visibility on the shelf.
Now, in today's economic crisis, a lot of people are looking quite carefully at prices and might be looking for the best bargain or something they have a coupon for. Is this influencing placement as well, or is it neck and neck? How does that work?
What's fascinating with placement is you have a direct effect on attention, which is fairly obvious, which is if you're on top, if you're in the center, if you're bright and visible, most people will see you. But then people also make inferences based on where the brand is on the shelf. So for example, people expect things on top to be higher quality. In fact, they expect things on top to be better in general. God is on top and hell is on the bottom. And so the question for the manager is, yes, it might impact my visibility, but what inferences will people make? For example, will they think my brand is out of price for them if I'm located on top? So managers need to look at both, and that's why in our study we look at the effect of in-store marketing on attention, but also then on choice.
What implications does this kind of research have for marketers? Somebody maybe who's introducing a brand or, as you said earlier, has a lower market share?
So I think the key idea is that you need to look at the impact of marketing, not just in terms of preferences, which are important obviously, but also in terms of awareness and visibility. Number two, I think you need to look at the point of purchase, not just as a distribution tool, but as a communication tool. And in fact, there's a lot of advertising which is now spent at the point of purchase, not just to make people buy, but also to change the image of the brand. And I think the last point is that you need to look at the future. I mean, if you're a marketer, you could say, yes, it's great that I build preferences, but preferences in general, they're stable, I mean, for most brands. And so the key question for you is, how can I best invest my money? And what we find is that in general, you're going to get a better return on your investment if you try to make your brand most visible, more salient, rather than trying to change people's perception, which most of the time is very hard to do, and most people have already an idea about what's good and what's not.
The last question has to do with more people buying online than in the store. Maybe not so much groceries, but groceries are something that you could buy online. You don't have to go into the store unless you're looking for bargains. And then how do you get the brand in front of somebody's face?
Well, the same thing. You know, you could negotiate with the retailer to have a good placement. You could also think about how people are going to sort the assortment by brand or price. And you could try to buy the keywords that matter. And at the end of the day, I think as a marketer, we know that what really matters is just testing. And fortunately, the availability of these new tools, for example, the eye tracking data, means that if I were a marketer moving online, I would basically try to measure different designs and see which one works best. And I would do that instead of just relying on my intuition, or, for example, instead of just asking people. It's a very important thing we found is that people have no intuition about what they look at. You cannot infer attention from recall by asking people what you remember seeing. If you ask this question, people will tell you what they typically like, or what they normally do, or what they think they do, not what they actually do. So you really need to ask them. You cannot just ask them. You need to measure what they do with the eye tracking.
And what else are you working on that we can expect to be talking to you in the months going forward?
I'm very interested in perceptions in general, not just whether people can find a product on the shelf, but also how people interpret package sizes and shapes to determine how much they should consume. So I hope to be able to talk to you about that soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Pierre Chandon, for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Shelley.